All right, so now that you have OpenScad downloaded and installed, I want you to go ahead and check out the documentation. Documentation has all types of table of contents to kind of get you started. I definitely recommend that you try out as much as you possibly can until you really start to understand how this whole thing works, because realistically, it's going to be a lot of trial and error using OpenScad. So there's all types of different code and stuff like that. So if we actually open this up, the cheat sheet, we see that there's kind of like a little bit of similarities to other programming languages. So if you followed anything with Coding for Entrepreneurs before, you'll see that, well, some of this stuff like transformations, those look kind of like functions. Well, they are functions, but that's what they kind of look like. There's mathematical formulas, just like in Python has mathematical formulas. It can create a circle, 2D things, 3D things. There's also for loops or loops in general, if statements, imports, linear extrude, rotate extrude, all types of things on here that will allow us to really kind of make a cool little project. So if you want, you can go through some of the documentation here and just try those things out. They have articles and other tutorials and stuff like that, but the point is for us is to just get some of those basic things done so we can actually 3D print something for real. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up OpenScad. I'm going to open OpenScad. And I'm going to make my first shape. So by using the cheat sheet, I could just use this all the time and say, okay, I want to use the circle. I'm going to first do a circle, and I'm going to set a radius, and I'll do r equals to 10, comma, d equals to 10, or let's say 100, and then I'll go to design and hit compile. I got an error. Well, when you actually want to create this stuff, you have to use a semicolon at the end, otherwise you will run into errors. So when you're actually done with some sort of function, make sure there's a semicolon following it. Hit compile, and there we go. So we've got a two-dimensional object that's a circle. Well, that's nice. So what about a square? Let's comment this out with 2 slashes, and then you do a square, and we could set a size, let's just say 10, all the way around. And we're going to do design and compile, and there's a square, right? Okay, so these are 2D objects. This doesn't do a whole lot for me, so let's actually see something a little bit smarter than that, like a 3D object. So I'm going to do a sphere this time, and I'll do radius equals to, let's say, 10, and then the diameter equals to 100. And then there's one thing that I want to make sure that you know is you can always use the cheat sheet whenever you're kind of lost on something. I do it all the time. And then also when we save it, so I'm actually going to go ahead and save this file, and I'm going to go into the desktop and create a new folder, call it 3D Printing Basics. Okay, so I'll do basic shapes. All right, so when I save it, it creates a basic shape for me, but it didn't get rid of that square, right? So I actually have to compile it every time. So if I actually want it to compile, I have to do that. Check that out. So that's a actual sphere that has now been created. Cool. So let's actually comment that out. So we're going to add a cube now. So square, or sorry, not square, but cube. And we can say, let's say 10 all over again. So I saved it and hit compile, or you can hit F5, and there's a cube. Now, what if I wanted to change how the cube was a little bit? Well, I can put in 3 values here. So an X, a Y, and a Z. And I can say X equals to 100, Y equals to 50, and Z equals to 25. So I just used variables, and if I save it, compile it, I now see that I have this new shape. So if I change this to, let's say, 200 and compile it, then it changes the shape, right? And if I put the sphere in, they intersect. So that is pretty cool. Now, the nice thing about using variables is we can use them in many places, right? So we will cover this more, but If I change the radius to being what X is, and I save it, and then I compile it, so F5 is a faster way to actually compile it. It will change the radius if we only have radius to what it is, right? So having two numbers changes the sphere to being the later number. So if I just added the diameter to be Y and then compiled it, it makes it small again. So that's what's happening there. All right, so in the quickest way, you can just use F5. If you're on a Mac, the F5 typically is a button that you can just press. And that creates a sphere with a little thing out the side of it, which is the cube. I'm going to put this back to being, let's say, like Z, and then do that. All right, cool. So that is it for our basic shapes. We have two shapes, but we can also just kind of add a bunch in here, right? And then compile it. But I don't see any difference at all. So that's where we want to actually talk about how we can move these things, and we will do that in the next one.